Well, thank you, Brother Eric, for that service and that prayer. Welcome to everyone who is here, and for those who are streaming. I am Stephen Choate, and I have been asked to teach this class. It is a class on the Minor Prophets. And last Wednesday, I asked all of you to read the book of Nahum. It's very short, only 3 chapters. As with the previous lesson, Zephaniah, I think I'm going to read through this. But unlike that time when I just read through it, planning on a little bit of commentary as we go along. There are many things that we can glean from any study of any passage of Scripture. I have referred to this series as Minor Prophets with a Major Message. And I continue to be struck at really these world-changing events that are taking place according to God's will, which in some cases are prophesied long in advance of the actual events themselves, but history and archaeology bear out that these things occurred. And I'm also struck by the fact that there's a lot of emotion in this material. This is one of the ways that we are created in God's image. And if you've been paying any attention at all, or in your own reading, perhaps it's come through more powerfully, there's a lot of emotion here. For example, Zephaniah last time, God's wrath is just poured out, and it seems to be all-encompassing. It threatens to overwhelm the earth because of the evils that he sees, even in the so-called good kingdom, Judah. And I'm also thinking of Hosea, where it seems like God is vacillating from terrible anger to profound grief and a sense of nostalgia as he remembers the past and as he thinks about Ephraim, the name often used to refer to Israel, the larger of the tribes that peopled that country, and how he brought Israel out of Egypt like a little child, taught him how to walk. And how can you read those things and not be able to connect, I think, on a very powerful emotional level with God's heartbroken state in that text? Well, we have wrath again in Nahum. Wrath is, I guess, a given in that a lot of these prophets are condemning terrible sins and are warning the sinner to mend their ways. But this is tinged with irony and even taunting, which seems a little strange when we think of God taunting really a sinful people. But I do think that word is appropriate, as we'll see. So, we've looked at Jonah. And Jonah is basically a message where God is calling the Assyrians to repentance, and along with it, the prophet himself. So this is really the other half of Jonah, because Nahum's prophecies, it's considered, come about 100 years later. And in spite of the original repentant spirit of the people of Nineveh, the capital of the great Gentile power Assyria, the Ninevites have fallen back into their evil ways. And so this message in Nahum is not about repenting in order to avert a calamity. It's about a final judgment and the doom that will come upon the people of Nineveh, and with it all of the Assyrian Empire in very short order. We've looked at Amos, where Amos from the south denounces the people of both the south and the north. And in consequence, God judges the nations, not only Israel, north and south kingdoms, but all of the surrounding nations as well. Hosea, God condemns the spiritual adultery of Israel as borne out through the lives of Hosea and his wife Gomer. Micah, God's will is done. Israel is taken into exile around 722, 721 BC by Sargon and Sennacherib, and they will never return to the land again. Those 10 tribes that comprise that nation are lost. And then last Wednesday, Zephaniah. And I'm using the lantern here, if you remember that word picture of really searching through the city for the unrighteous. And so God warns Judah, the surrounding kingdoms as well, of coming punishment. And we'll see that continue to unfold in Habakkuk and Obadiah. But in between, if the chronology is correct, we're dealing with Nahum and the burden against the people of Nineveh. So Nahum, and this time I remembered to bring my readers. So our author presumably is Nahum. Interestingly, his name means comfort or consolation. This is apparently an abbreviated form of Nehemiah, which I thought was interesting. He identifies himself as an Elkoshite. What do we call ourselves here in this town? Are we Circeites or Circeans? We're Arkansans, I guess. We're Americans. Well, nobody knows exactly where Elkosh is. There is a dispute that the principal text I'm using, Jack Lewis's Minor Prophets, he discusses this to some extent, but nobody's really sure. I thought it really interesting, though, that the city Capernaum means village of Nahum. And I think that's interesting because, of course, Capernaum was one of the major places that Christ's ministry was based in as he engaged in his ministry that 3-year period before his death, burial, and resurrection. So wouldn't it be fascinating if Capernaum was the first century name for Elkosh and that this was the village of Nahum? So the date, there is debate over Nahum's time. There's debate over all of these minor prophets' times, but the dates that I've given you, I think, are dependable, or I wouldn't be using them. Most would date Nahum around 650, maybe a little earlier than that, to 612 BC, because he references in the text the capture of the Egyptian city of Thebes by the Assyrians. And again, this is where some of that taunting spirit comes into play, as we'll see. And also the destruction of Nineveh takes place about 612 BC. So if our dates are right, Nahum is a contemporary of Jeremiah, not far from the time of Zephaniah and Habakkuk, whose messages we have yet to explore. The basic message of Nahum prophesies the destruction of the Assyrian capital of Nineveh as Jonah had done. And as I've already said, and as I've noted here as well, Jonah is living roughly about 100 years earlier in time, but this time destruction is certain. It's a finished pronouncement, as we will see. Essential structure. Nahum 1:1 is the introductory verse where the prophet identifies himself in his origin. Nahum 1:2 through 15 is a theophany, which is to say this is God manifesting himself in judgment. And then we have Nahum chapters 2 through 3, which very powerfully and in some instances very graphically speaks of the downfall of Nineveh. And then Nahum 3, verses 8 and 9 are the epitaph. So this is like, putting up the marker and saying, here lies so-and-so. And it's a powerful one as well. So here's the map that I've been using. But I don't really know, honestly, why I left it in there, because it will serve no real purpose for tonight. We don't know exactly where Nahum is when he delivers his prophecy. Israel has yet to, or I should say Judah has yet to be taken into captivity. So perhaps he's in the middle of the southern kingdom. It doesn't appear that he's in Assyria. again, this is not a prophecy of warning for repentance. This is really a prophecy that is surely intended to give comfort to not only the people of Judah, but people throughout the entire Middle East at this time, because Assyria is universally hated and feared. And so its message is really to give comfort to those who have become victims of Assyrian aggression. And so really the map that I should be using is this map. And there you see the Fertile Crescent. I've used this several times. And the area that the ancient Greeks called Mesopotamos, the land between the two rivers, Mesopotamia. Today this is Iraq. This is the land between the Tigris, roughly in the northeast, and the Euphrates, the southwest rivers. And there's Nineveh, and the red triangle marks it. The Tigris, at this point in time, runs right up to the walls of the city, and that will be very important as well. Okay, so I think it's a short enough message that I think, as I've said, I'll just read this and break from time to time to share a little bit of thought with you. Nineveh is, of course, the whole focus. So Nahum chapter 1, verse 1. The burden against Nineveh, the book of the vision of Nahum the Elkoshite. So here's the theophany. God is jealous, and the Lord avenges. The Lord avenges and is furious. The Lord will take vengeance on his adversaries, and he reserves wrath for his enemies. The Lord is slow to anger and great in power, and will not at all acquit the wicked. The Lord has his way in the whirlwind and in the storm, and the clouds are the dust of his feet. He rebukes the sea and makes it dry, and dries up all the rivers. Bashan and Carmel wither, and the flower of Lebanon wilts. The mountains quake before him, the hills melt, and the earth heaves at his presence. Yes, the world and all who dwell in it. So this is specifically what is meant by theophany. The idea here is that God manifests himself, and not only is he speaking, but he's showing his power through these various means, the whirlwind, the storm, the cloud. And we all know, I think, the awesome power of nature. And just to reflect for a moment or two about the fact that God is the one who created nature, controls nature, and utilizes nature for his own will and purposes. And it continues in the same powerful vein. The mountains quake before him, the hills melt, and the earth heaves at his presence. Yes, the world and all who dwell in it. Who can stand before his indignation? And who can endure the fierceness of his anger? His fury is poured out like fire, and the rocks are thrown down by him. But then there's this interlude. Once more, no matter how terrible the prophecies may be, no matter how powerful and fearful they may be, there's always hope and positivity leavened throughout them. And so for one who is an enemy to God, then one is to quake as the hills are quaking. But then one who aligns themselves with God's will and purposes, we have verses 7 onward. The Lord is good, a stronghold in the day of trouble, and he knows those who trust in him. But with an ever-flowing flood, he will make an utter end of its place, and darkness will pursue his enemies. The reference to flooding is interesting, as we'll see. Verse 9, what do you conspire against the Lord? He will make an utter end of it. Affliction will not rise up a second time, for while tangled like thorns and while drunken like drunkards, they shall be devoured like stubble, fully dried. From you comes forth one who plots evil against the Lord, a wicked counselor. So now we get into the beginning of the pronouncements generically about the evil, and then chapters 2 and 3 focuses specifically upon Nineveh. Thus says the Lord, though they are safe and likewise many, yet in this manner they will be cut down when he passes through. Though I have afflicted you, this is surely referencing his people. Though I have afflicted you, I will afflict you no more. For now I will break off his yoke from you and burst your bonds apart. Surely this is referencing the people who are his main focus here, the Assyrians, and particularly their leaders in the capital Nineveh. Verse 14, the Lord has given a command concerning you. Your name shall be perpetuated no longer. Now that's really important because in antiquity, for almost all ancient peoples, name is very, very important. Indeed, for the ancient Egyptian pharaohs, if their names were defaced and their memories were forgotten, that was in essence a damnation. And so depriving someone of their name meant that they were being rubbed out of history. And that meant that they would be forgotten, they were of no account, they were basically worthless and damned. Out of the house of your gods I will cut off the carved image and the molded image. I will dig your grave, for you are vile. Behold, on the mountains, the feet of him who brings good tidings, who proclaims peace. Now, this sounds familiar because we know in the New Testament that this kind of metaphor is used to speak of those who bring the gospel. In this case, the good news is really a terrible pronouncement of destruction on the part of those who would align themselves against God. And so we have the idea of a messenger who comes across the hills and the mountains to share the news that great Nineveh has fallen, that wicked city that has oppressed all of the peoples of the earth. And so therefore, this is good news, and the feet of him who brings good tidings are blessed. O Judah, keep your appointed feasts, perform your vows, for the wicked one shall no more pass through you. He is utterly cut off. I hope you have noticed, even in what I've read so far, that there is a finality here. There's not any hesitation. There's not any vacillation. There's not any doubt. Judgment is being pronounced. And God is saying, I will dig your grave. You are vile. He is saying, you will be utterly cut off. Your name will be removed. There is no uncertainty about this message. Chapter 2, he who scatters has come up before your face. Man the fort, watch the road, strengthen your flanks, fortify your power mightily. So we're getting into some of that word picture that describes the kind of things that would be going on in any ancient city when the news has arrived that the enemy is coming. You've got to prepare. You've got to fortify your walls, strengthen your fortifications, man the watch. You've got to watch the road. And this is God's message through Nahum. And so this is part of the taunting that I'm talking about, because it doesn't matter how many people the Assyrians have to man the watch, to watch the road, to fortify the walls. None of that is material in the face of God's great power. For the Lord will restore the excellence of Jacob like the excellence of Israel, for the emptiers have emptied them out, surely a pun there, and ruined their vine branches. The shills of his mighty men are made red. The valiant men are in scarlet. The chariots come with flaming torches in the day of his preparation, and the spears are brandished. The chariots rage in the streets. They jostle one another in the broad roads. They seem like torches. They run like lightning. So here again, as with the first verse of chapter 2, verses 3 and 4 are describing in a very powerful word picture the kind of hubbub and the kind of coming and going that's taking place in preparation of an enemy about to be received. Soldiers are preparing their weapons. Chariots are pulled together. Everything is prepared. Spirits are brandished. They're waved in the air. But none of this will be of any benefit for the defender. He remembers his nobles. They stumble in their walk. They make haste to her walls. And the defense is prepared. The gates of the rivers are opened, and the palace is dissolved. So typically in the ancient world, as in the medieval and Renaissance of Western Europe, the nobility under a king would be his chief officers. So they're the people of the army who are responsible for rallying the troops, for sending them out, giving them their orders, and they're stumbling. They're making haste. The defense is ready. But, verse 6, the gates of the rivers are opened. The palace is dissolved. So remember that bit, because that's really important. Verse 7, it is decreed. So that's pretty final, you know. We would say today, to use our vernacular, it's a done deal, you know. It probably, very likely had not happened anywhere around this particular time that Nahum is prophesying. Again, it could be anywhere from 650 to 612. The time of the destruction is 612. But it's as if it's already done. It's decreed. She shall be led away captive. She shall be brought up, and her maidservant shall lead her as with the voice of doves beating their breasts. So that's something that would be familiar too. After the fall of the city, its people, those who have not been killed outright, its people are gathered together. The fit and able are sold as spoils, slaves. And you can imagine the weeping and the wailing and the tearing of hair that would be very, very typical in the ancient world as a sign of profound grief. Probably because not only of the situation of the individuals themselves, here it's clearly predominantly women, but also because typically children were killed outright, sometimes literally bashed against a wall. And so this is describing the aftermath of a defeated Nineveh. Verse 8, though Nineveh of old was like a pool of water, now they flee away. Halt, halt, they cry, but no one turns back. Take spoil of silver, take spoil of gold. There is no end of treasure or wealth of every desirable prize. So this too is part of the description of the fall of the city, because we have the last few defenders who realize it's over and there's no point in staying. I'm just going to die. And so the soldiers are fleeing. Their officers are saying, halt, halt, stand in your ranks. But no one turns back. And then on the side of those who would conquer and despoil, they're avid to get their prize, which consists not only of the slaves that will be sold, but also of the gold and silver that would be part of a treasury of a capital city of a great power in this time. Verse 10, she is empty, desolate, and waste. The heart melts and the knees shake. Much pain is in every side, and all their faces are drained of color. So now we're going back to the defeated again, as we are with verses 11 and 12, although this is more metaphorical. Remember, the lion was one of the national symbols of the Assyrians. In fact, it was considered to be, even back then, the king of beasts. And we're told that the Assyrian kings kept lions as really prey for their sport. So on occasion, they would, if they weren't slaughtering people, they would get in their chariot and they would go around shooting lions. And they had what we would today call Secret Service men, heavily armed guards right at their side. So if the lion got too close, the men would spear the lion. And there are many powerful reliefs that depict this kind of activity that were in fact recovered from places like Nimrod and Nineveh that show the sport of kings. But now the lion is being used as a metaphor to speak of the people of Nineveh and the Assyrian kings themselves. Where is the dwelling of the lions and the feeding place of the young lions, where the lion walked, the lioness and lion's cub, and no one made them afraid? The lion tore in pieces enough for his cubs, killed for his lionesses, filled his caves with prey and his dens with flesh. Verse 13, behold, I am against you, says the Lord of hosts. And I don't know about you, but I get a shiver every now and then when I read something like that. What a terrible thing to hear God saying, behold, I am against you. I will burn your chariots in smoke, and the sword shall devour your young lions. I will cut off your prey from the earth, and the voice of your messengers shall be heard no more. Woe to the bloody city! It is all full of lies and robbery. Its victim never departs. The noise of a whip and the noise of rattling wheels, of galloping horses, of clattering chariots, horsemen charge with bright sword and glittering spear. There is a multitude of slain, a great number of bodies, countless corpses. They stumble over the corpses because of the multitude of harlotries of the seductive harlot, the mistress of sorceries, who sells nations through her harlotries and families through her sorceries. Behold, I am against you, says the Lord of hosts. Well, not only is that a powerful pronouncement of the Lord's indignation, his anger, his determination to oppose the evil people of Nineveh, but we also have in verses 1, 2, and 3 of chapter 3 another powerful description of the city itself. And then as we transition from verse 3 into the following verses of that section, we get sort of a metaphorical image of the victims of Nineveh, who has grown fat on the wealth of conquered peoples and nations. And so Nahum describes it as being, strip all of it away, the chariots and their nobles and the finery and the luxury and the wealth, the great palaces of Sennacherib and other rulers. And the reality is innumerable corpses. These are the dead victims of Nineveh. And the wealth of Nineveh has been stripped from them. And he depicts the city as like a tremendous prostitute, a terrible harlot who will do anything in order to enrich herself. Verse 5 again, behold, I am against you, says the Lord of hosts. I will lift your skirts over your face. I will show the nations your nakedness and the kingdoms your shame. I will cast abominable filth upon you, make you vile, and make you a spectacle. It shall come to pass that all who look upon you will flee from you and say, Nineveh is laid waste. Who will bemoan her? Where shall I see comforters for you? So here's some of that sarcasm, some of that irony, some of that taunting. He's likened Nineveh as a harlot, a wanton woman, a prostitute. And he's saying, I'm going to pull your skirts over your face. I'm going to expose you to humiliation and shame. And not only that, but I'm going to cast filth on you, rubbish, dirt, manure. And you will become vile because, in fact, he's already said that you are vile in chapter 1, verse 14. So the idea is that God, through his power, will make it clear that this is a broken power, a fallen, evil city, make it a spectacle for all of the world at that time. And the taunting really comes into play in the latter part of verse 7, because the messengers say, Nineveh is laid waste. Who will bemoan her? And then God says, where shall I see comforters for you? It's rhetorical. There will be none who will need to be comforted, but there will be countless who will rejoice at the fall of this evil city. Verse 8, are you better than Nahum that was situated by the river? Nahum refers to ancient Thebes, the capital of New Kingdom Egypt, and the river, perhaps in your translation as in mine, it's capitalized. When we see that, the river, it means the great river, it means the Nile. So this is referencing an earlier conquest of one of the preceding rulers of Assyria, Ashurbanipal, who was the last great ruler of Assyria, who actually made inroads into Egypt. This had begun as early as about 670 by Esarhaddon. And Ashurbanipal conquers Thebes, about 663. So in Nahum's time, presumably this is a well-known event, that Thebes, Ammon, has fallen by these very people, the Assyrian people. And they too had a great river, in fact the greatest in the ancient world, the Nile. But it proved to be no protection for the people of Thebes, even though the only real power against them was a human power, the Assyrian hosts of Ashurbanipal. Picking up again with verse 8. Are you better than Ammon, that was situated by the river, that had the waters around her, whose rampart was the sea, whose wall was the sea? Ethiopia and Egypt were her strength, and it was boundless. Put and Lubim were your helpers. Yet she was carried away, she went into captivity. Her young children also were dashed to pieces. At the head of every street they cast lots for her honorable men, and all her great men were bound in chains. You also will be drunk, you will be hidden, you also will seek refuge from the enemy. All your strongholds are fig trees with ripened figs. If they are shaken, they fall into the mouth of the eater. So basically, he's telling the people of Assyria, you took this great city, the capital of Egypt. The Assyrians were not able to maintain strong hold over Egypt, but Thebes, the capital, fell to their power, and it suffered these terrible things. Even though it had powerful allies, they proved to be no real benefit to the Egyptians. And so this is clearly parallel idea, that just as this great city, Thebes, the capital of Egypt, fell, and it only had the power of man against it, so Nineveh will also fall because it has the power of man and God. And he likens the people to being drunk, to being hidden. And he says that they're so weak, it's like a tree that has come into ripened harvest time with figs. All you have to do is just shake the branch and the fruit falls into your mouth. It's going to be that easy. Verse 13, surely your people in your midst are women. The gates of your land are wide open for your enemies. Fire shall devour the bars of your gates. Verse 14, draw your water for the siege. Fortify your strongholds. Go into the clay and tread the mortar. Make strong the brick kiln. There the fire will devour you. The sword will cut you off. It will eat you up like a locust. So let's remember again that he could be making this prophecy anywhere from 650 to right before the actual event, 612. So this is again part of what I've said as regards taunting. He's basically saying, strengthen your fortifications all you want. Make that clay into bricks and fire those bricks and put it in the wall and make it strong. It won't make any difference at all. He uses the imagery of locusts. And so let me pick up again with the latter half of verse 15. Make yourself many like the locust. Make yourself many like the swarming locusts. You have multiplied your merchants more than the stars of heaven. The locust plunders and flies away. Your commanders are like swarming locusts, and your generals like great grasshoppers, which camp in the hedges on a cold day. When the sun rises, they flee away, and the place where they are is not known. So it doesn't matter how many people they mass. It doesn't matter what preparations they make. The word picture should be very clear. They're going to be like locusts for all of their great numbers. When the time comes, they're going to flee. All of these hosts will flee away, and their place will not be known. So now we're getting into the epitaph. Your shepherds slumber, O king of Assyria. Your nobles rest in the dust. Your people are scattered on the mountains, and no one gathers them. Your injury has no healing. Your wound is severe. All who hear news of you will clap their hands over you. For upon whom has not your wickedness passed continually? Well, another quick word here. In our society, this means appreciation. But in the ancient world, if you're clapping your hand over somebody, it's like you're thumbing your nose at them. We don't do that anymore either. It's like you're mocking them, pulling faces, making fun of them because they're powerless and they can't do anything in spite of your mockery. And he's basically saying that if the nations of the world were people, Assyria is mortally wounded, literally dying. Don't expect any help. People are going to come over and clap their hands over your head. Good, go. You're not wanted. Assyria was of no positive benefit to mankind. And that sounds terrible, but that's more or less a quote from Dr. Lewis. Well, it's a powerful, powerful statement. And as I've said, there's wrath, but there's taunting and mockery here as well. So the word picture is in part made complete by an analogy, a parallelism with Thebes. And as with so many other artifacts that I've shared with you, as well as others that I'm planning on sharing, the British Museum has a wonderful repository of antiquities. And this is a relief. And I know it just looks like a brown mass amongst a lot of green with some squiggles. But this is a relief that really comes from this site, the fall of Thebes, about 663 BC. That's a little bit better, but not much. So the Assyrians here aren't really interested in conveying an illusory quality of space and depth. Everything is very flat. This is a relief, low grade, very low relief. And what you're seeing here, if you can make out that, these are ladders. These are scaling ladders. Very typical practice in the ancient world. When a city is besieged, scaling ladders are run up. Defenders are shot down so soldiers can run up those ladders and try to overpower the defenders on the walls. And let's see, I'm not technologically gifted. Here's a great shield, a great wall shield, and there's several of these throughout. So there are people up here. If you could make him out, there's a really huge figure here. This is very much a convention of the ancient world. Important people are shown physically larger than the less important people. So this is probably supposed to show a general or a great noble who's serving as an officer. And the defenders are up here, and some of them are falling down, struck by Assyrian arrows, and it's really chaotic, very, very chaotic. And here's another one on the other side. So here are the Assyrian archers who are pulling their taut bows back and picking off defenders. Here's one falling down headlong. Here's some other soldiers waiting to come in. Here are a few brave Assyrian soldiers who are making their way up the ladder. And then down below we have the aftermath. Again, this is powerfully described by Nahum in his text, but it's described about Thebes, but also Nineveh as well. So this is the aftermath of the siege, where a breach has been broken into the walls, and we have the city falling, and slaves, prisoners of war at this point, yet to be slaves, are being taken out. And then here are spoils on the backs of donkeys and asses, and more prisoners of war who are made to carry the loot of their own city. Thebes has fallen. And I guess there's a touch of the theatrical in me, because Thebes is gone, but it comes back. Thebes continues to be a mighty power for some time to come. But Nineveh, on the other hand, this is a parallelism as regards Nineveh. Here's an artist of our time recreating Nineveh, that great and wicked city. Our sources maintain, as does archaeology, that Nineveh was truly a great city. The Greek historian Diodorus Siculus, who lived in the 1st century BC, tells us that the extent of the city walls, complete extent, 61 miles, that it enclosed about 7 miles within the city. We've been told from Jonah that it took 3 days to go through this congested city. Diodorus says that Nineveh had 1,500 towers, each of which was 200 feet in height. There may be some exaggeration here, but that's what this ancient source of the 1st century BC says. And so it was a great city with massive fortification walls and earthen defensive walls. And here in this recreation, you have the chariots coming and going. You have, this is supposed to be the palace of Sennacherib. If you remember the lesson of Micah, I showed you the rogues gallery of many of the leading Assyrian kings who were responsible for taking the northern kingdom into exile. And among them was Sargon I, who built Khorsabad, Dur-Sharrukin. But his son didn't care for that site, so his son relocated the capital here at Nineveh. It had been a capital before. Now it becomes the great capital and the last capital of the Assyrians. Sennacherib built a great palace, which archaeologists determine had some 71 rooms, and his successors lived here as well. The greatest of these was Ashurbanipal, who was the greatest of the Assyrian rulers before the last one, during whose reign Nineveh fell. Ashurbanipal was not only a great conqueror, but a great ruler, and he had a great library. When this site was excavated, 22,000 cuneiform tablets were discovered in the library of Sennacherib. So this was a wealthy, powerful city, again, the capital of the Assyrian Empire, made wealthy through the spoil of conquered nations. And incidentally, some of the slaves who worked on building Sennacherib's palace were probably Jewish captives from the kingdom of Israel. So this site was excavated by several archaeologists, but one who I want to touch on briefly was Sir Henry Austin Layard. I think I've already mentioned his name when we were dealing with Jonah. Layard excavated here between 1847 and 1851. After he came back to London, to England, he published a book of his excavations. Here's an artist's recreation of his time, 1853, of how he thought Nineveh would have looked, complete with the great fortification walls. The river there is the Tigris River, which, as I've said, ran very close by the walls themselves. The great fortification walls, the great palace of Sennacherib, off to the left, a great ziggurat, a temple to the gods of Assyria. And this I think is so powerful, I'm going to indulge myself and read it again. Behold, I am against you, says the Lord of hosts. Woe to the bloody city. It is full of lies and robbery. Its victim never departs. The noise of a whip and the noise of rattling wheels, of galloping horses, of clattering chariots, horsemen charged with bright sword and glittering spear. And then there's that transition into the victims. There's a multitude of slain, a great number of bodies, countless corpses. They stumble over the corpses. Because of the multitude of harlotries of the seductive harlot, the mistress of sorceries, who sells nations through her harlotries and families through her sorceries, behold, I am against you, says the Lord of hosts. Let's think for a moment, with this fresh in our minds. I think we all know that this is a fallen world. This is a world that is constantly in change, constantly in motion. And we are easily distracted by the physical, the temporal. What if we saw things through God's eyes? I think we've just been given a little bit of that opportunity. I think when God looked down upon Nineveh, he did not see the stately palaces and the strong fortifications. He didn't see the purple and gold. He didn't see the wealth. He saw a lot of dead bodies. He saw the evil of a very evil people. And that sobered him and angered him to the point that this judgment, long in coming, is finally pronounced. Well, the human tools are actually a motley of individuals. We know that we have Nabopolassar, who is going to be the father of Nebuchadnezzar, and he leads the Babylonians. They're the most important people who are in charge of this. And we have also his allies, the nomadic Medes and Persians, and they are from off to the east and a bit to the north of what today is Iraq. But they are willing allies because Assyria has grown too powerful and everyone fears Assyria. And then we have true barbarians by any definition of that word. The Scythians, I touched on them last time because they are spoken of in the ancient sources as making foray down through the Levant, really sacking the Philistine cities and even going into Egypt. But they appear not to have attacked Judah. And so Dr. Lewis, in his chapter on Zephaniah, speculates, as do others, that maybe the enemy there is the Scythians. But then Dr. Lewis says, no, this can't be, because the Scythians, there's no indication that they ever attacked the kingdom of Judah. So surely the real enemy that Zephaniah is speaking of is the Babylonian power. Well, they are from the Caucasus Mountains, far off to the north, in what today is southern Russia and the Ukraine. And a little bit off to the east of them, another wild and woolly group, the Sumerians, who are sometimes associated with the Scythians, but I'm told an ethnically different people. So these are really wild-haired barbarians by any measure of ancient and modern definition. And so this motley bunch allies in order to take on the great power of Assyria and to overthrow it. And I'm afraid you can't make that out very well, but this is an academic painting that is intended to recreate really the awesome destruction of the capital city of Nineveh. And you can make that out. Good, I'm glad to see that. This is an actual cuneiform tablet letter of the last ruler of Assyria, Sin-shara-ishkum. And he is writing to Nabopolassar, the leader of the Babylonian forces, whom he rightly recognizes as the real enemy. This is a copy of the original. The original dates back to the 7th century BC, the very time we're dealing with, but this is a 2nd century BC copy. So that's interesting. People hundreds of years later recognize that this is a significant historical document, and they made a copy of it in order to preserve this letter, which has come down to us today. And it really uncovers the desperate state that Sin-shara-ishkum is in, because Assyria's forces are depleted. The enemies are at the wall. And Nabopolassar is being entreated by Sin-shara-ishkum to withdraw and to form an alliance with him. And he's eating a lot of humble pie because Babylon for centuries has been subject to Assyria. In fact, actually the father of Sin-shara-ishkum, Ashurbanipal, and Sin-shara-ishkum himself helped to put down a revolt of Babylon earlier on. But now everything has changed. And so Sin-shara-ishkum in this tablet repeatedly addresses Nabopolassar as the king, my lord. So he is abasing himself in order to beg that they withdraw their forces so he can get on top of the situation and can recover the forces of Assyria. But the reply has not survived. Apparently it was a negative. It was too good an opportunity to pass up. Well, there's a famous painting called the death of Sardanapalus that was painted by a great French painter, Eugène Delacroix, 1827. I'm just showing you part of it because there are elements here that I don't think appropriate to this setting. Sardanapalus is the name that the Greek historian Diodorus Siculus gives to Sinshara Ishkun. And Diodorus Siculus tells us that Sinshara Ishkun, although he was known as being a warrior, he had an uxorious side, a side that loved luxury and sensuality. And Diodorus Siculus is terribly critical of him as having so given himself over to the pleasures of the harem and the court, the wealth, good eating, that he is like a woman. And I wonder if that's not one reason why Nahum speaks of the people, the defenders of Nineveh, as being like women. Because Diodorus Siculus tells us that Sinshara Ishkun was so given to this kind of practice that he even dressed in women's clothes and spun and made cloth, and rarely was he seen outside of the harem. And so he was acting like a woman in every sense of the word. Well, Diodorus Siculus goes on to say that when facing this desperate situation, Sardanapalus, again, that's the name that he uses, decided on a terrible solution to this unsolvable problem. His forces are depleted, his defenses are gone, the enemy is literally at the gate and coming through the gate. And so we're told by Diodorus Siculus that he had all of the things that he loved, not only gold and silver treasures, but the beautiful women of his harem, the beautiful horses of his stables, everything that he loved brought into his audience hall. There in front of him it was all killed, destroyed, and he himself burned himself alive on a pyre in a fiery immolation. So this is the end of Assyria. And the epitaph then, there is no healing for your injury. Your wound is severe. All who hear the news of you applaud your downfall, for who has not experienced your constant cruelty? Well, Layard, as I've said, excavated this site. There he is in native garb with a musket. He was no real archaeologist. He was basically a diplomat who was out for as much loot as he could really acquire. He supposedly said that his goal was to obtain the largest possible number of well-preserved objects of art at the least possible outlay of time and money. So obviously he's not interested in archaeological science. But nevertheless, his excavations uncovered really the wealth of the Library of Ashurbanipal, the Sennacherib Palace that I've already referred to, and many other great finds. If you go there today, this is pretty much what you'll see. And I don't want to leave us with this, with the idea of this coalition of these rogues who overthrew another great rogue, Assyria. I know I'm about out of time, but notice again the references to the rivers, to the waters, most notably chapter 2, verse 6. The gates of the rivers are opened, the palace is dissolved. So Diodorus Siculus tells us that the Tigris overflowed its banks. And in consequence of that, he says 20 stadia of the walls collapsed. Stadia is a Roman unit of measurement. This is 125 paces, 606 feet. So you multiply 20 by 606, you come up with 12,138 feet. Archaeologists found about 1,200 feet of the wall right on the Tigris. The Tigris is pulled away from the site now, gone. There was no sign of it. So this wasn't just a coalition of men, rogues, out to take down another rogue. This was God's doing. He caused the great waters of the Tigris to overflow their banks. Those brick fortifications collapsed under their own weight. The wall was open so wide that chariots could go through. This was the real downfall of the people of Nineveh. Well, practical application. There is a limit to God's patience. 100 years is a long time for a pagan Gentile people to be given mercy. And that time had come to its full extent. God's power is absolute, not only nature, but humankind. He uses tools of service and disservice. Which will you or I be? That's, I think, one of the most important questions here. And next time we'll be focused upon Habakkuk and with it the lament of the fall of Judah, the southern kingdom. Let's have a quick word of prayer. Father, thank you for your word, and thank you for the messages that we're studying. Thank you for these reminders of your great power, your judgment, the fact that though you are merciful and long-suffering, you will only stand for so much for so long. Help us to be mindful of our ways in your eyes and to strive to walk as you would have us to walk. Help us to be the people that you've called us to be, not only in living godly, upright lives to the best of our abilities, but also in sharing the good news with others and trying to serve others as you would have us do. I pray that you would help us as we continue on through the remainder of this week. I pray that you would nurse those who need comfort, that you would help us be sensitive to those needs and respond to it. I pray that you would help us to be, again, the salt and the light, the leaven that the church is intended to be and that we are called to be as individuals. I pray all of these things in Christ's name. Amen.